The White House has just wrapped up the first briefing with the press since the president returned from the G20 summit. Several topics were discussed, including Donald Trump Jr. and the president's cyber unit with Russia. Here's a little of the meeting.
Russia. Yesterday, the president tweeted about the cybersecurity unit being put together, and then about 12 hours later said it would never happen. What went down in those 12 hours that so drastically changed that situation?
This was part of a discussion in that meeting, and look, we recognize that Russia is a cyber threat, but we also recognize the need to have conversations with our adversaries. And when our adversaries see strength like they did with the president in the meeting, they can look for other ways to work on shared interests and look for positive places where they can move the ball forward, particularly on things like the ceasefire, and that became a greater focus and something the president chose to stay focused on is that front. Major.
Sarah, just to clarify, that idea is dead.
Look, I would say that discussions may still take place, but that's as far as it is right now.
Okay. And I know you just said a minute ago you're not going to make any additional statement, but there's a history, and we have been asked by you and others at the podium to respect the statements you make there. So there's a long history of blanket denials during the transition and during times of this administration about nobody within the campaign having any meetings under any circumstances at all with Russian officials. And now one was disclosed this weekend. The original characterization of that meeting was amended within 24 hours when new information was placed before Don Jr. How are we to take all of these blanket denials that have occurred through the transition and now, when it has been proven and recognized by the president's attorney and Don Jr. that those blanket denials were not factual?
Look, I think the point is that we've tried to make every single time today and then, and will continue to make in those statements, is that there was simply no collusion that they keep trying to create that there was.
But that's a different question than was asked at the time and different than the statements were about. The questions originally, as you know and I know, were about contacts, and those were blanket denied. And then when the contacts became confirmed, then it was, well, they were infrequent. Well, now we have a whole pattern of lots of different meetings that have to be confirmed later. And those original questions were not about collusion, Sarah. They were just about contacts.
They were originally about that. That's the whole premise of which you're asking the question, is whether or not the campaign colluded with Russia. That's the premise of the entire scope of your questioning. And the point we've tried to make over and over again and will continue to make is that there wasn't. And beyond that, I really can't offer you anything.
CBS News White House correspondent Major Garrett joins us from the White House North Lawn. Major, a lot to get to in this afternoon's briefing. What stood out to you?
Well, that exchange was pretty memorable, I think, not just because Sarah Sanders, Huckabee Sanders, the Deputy White House Press Secretary, said no collusion, but she completely mischaracterized the way the story has evolved. And don't believe me, just look back at all the reporting done during the transition. All the questions were originally about, well, did anyone in the campaign ever meet with anybody that could in any way, shape, or form be characterized as a Russian operative, a Russian official, or someone who had interests within Russia? And the denials were absolutely emphatic. No, no one had any contact at any level at any time. And now we have contacts with Don Jr., Paul Manafort, the former National Campaign Chairman, Jared Kushner, Michael Flynn, and others. And that evolution has always come under one set of circumstances, Tony, and one set of circumstances only: journalistic distress and duress, meaning journalists found out things that the Trump campaign or administration had to subsequently and with some degree of reluctance confirm. And those confirmations oftentimes came with a shallow bit of information confirming it that was only expanded again under journalistic pressure and journalistic duress. And no better example of that exists than the phenomenon of this weekend, where Don Jr., the president's son, completely mischaracterized, and intentionally so, this meeting with this Russian lawyer with clear and well-established ties to the Kremlin, saying it was only about adoption between United States families and Russian families and the Russian government. Not true. Under journalistic pressure and journalistic duress, Don Jr. within 24 hours admitted that it was in fact a meeting about gaining political opposition research on the Hillary Clinton campaign. Is that evidence of collusion? No. But it's evidence of a willingness to sit down with people in Trump Tower who have clear ties to the Kremlin in a political context about the election they were participating in. That is confirmation of something that had been serially denied for weeks, if not months, during the transition and this administration. So when Sarah Huckabee Sanders says there's no collusion, each and every step of the way, the questions were about contacts, which may, over time, provide evidence of collusion. But they denied the contacts. Then they have to confirm them. And then, under duress, have to confirm for the very first time that there was a meeting with 3 people with central roles in the Trump campaign and a Kremlin-backed attorney with long-established and well-known ties to not only the Kremlin, but powerful political oligarchs in Russia. That is a revelation, pure and simple. And when Sarah Huckabee Sanders says, well, I've got nothing more to add, and that we've always been transparent, the record itself contradicts that airy assertion of transparency.
Well, let's talk a bit more about that. How does the White House and how has the White House explained this process of, well, actually, this process of correcting prior statements proven to be inaccurate by follow-up reporting?
That, well, yes, okay, that's true, but it's not collusion, and there's no evidence of it. And that's not where this story began. And I just remind our viewers, in stories that evolve, you have to go back and remind yourself where it began. And where it began was there were never any contacts. Then once contacts were established, well, there was no collusion. Then no evidence of collusion. Now, Sarah Huckabee Sanders today did say in a sort of blanket way, no collusion of any kind. That's her assertion of the state of play. Very well, fine. But there are 2 separate congressional investigations and a special counsel investigation into that very question. But that blanket denial is, I think, legitimately brought into at least some question when what we didn't know a week ago, we know now about this Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, Donald Jr. meeting with this Russian attorney with, as I've said, and as others have more thoroughly reported than I have, and we'll ever get to in our conversation right now, Tony, well-established links, not only to the Kremlin and Putin's inner circle, but very powerful, politically connected oligarchs in Russia. Is that kind of meeting appropriate in this context? Well, the American people can decide for themselves, and Congress and a special counsel will decide if there are any legal implications. I don't know if they will be or not, but I do know this. A week ago, we didn't know it, and now we know it, and the confirmations came under pressure, duress, and even then, and initially, they were mischaracterized intentionally.
One of the questions going forward will be how high up does this go? And right now we're talking about the president's son, the president's campaign manager, the president's significant advisors. Donald Trump Jr. in his statement said that his father did not know of this meeting, had no understanding of the contents of the meeting. Was that topic, the president's knowledge or lack thereof, discussed at all in today's briefing?
Yes, Sarah Huckabee Sanders said the first the president learned of this meeting was in the revelations over this weekend. Now, it would be interesting to know if the president was consulted in any way, shape, or form about Donald Jr.'s first characterization of the meeting, which was incorrect and intentionally incorrect. That's the only conclusion one can come to. The characterization came from Donald Jr. And then when he was forced to acknowledge that which had been disclosed, then amended it to say, yes, in fact, it wasn't about adoptions, it was about politics, and specifically opposition research that might be helpful about Hillary Clinton to our father's campaign.
So, Major, before I let you go, and since we've talked about journalistic efforts here, I want to touch on the strange 1920s aspect to these briefings where we have no live component, we have no picture, everything is only after the fact audio. What's going on with these prohibitions on traditional modern media?
Well, the administration has simply grown increasingly uncomfortable with projecting its own message on television, or perhaps uncomfortable with projecting a message that in any way, shape, or form interferes with the president's projection of his message on television. But today is an interesting case study, Tony. The president has no events today, not one. There's not one chance, at least as the schedule as we understand it, for him to be on camera today. So there's nothing to interfere with. And I would just make this one general observation. Mark Short, who is a very capable, long-time veteran of Capitol Hill and American politics on the Republican side of the aisle, is head of the Office of Legislative Affairs at this White House. He gave a 30-minute briefing, twice as long as Sarah Huckabee Sanders, I will point out, about obstruction of Trump administration nominees before the United States Senate. And he gave a lengthy explanation of the numbers and the procedures, and explained why even though Republicans control the Senate, they still can't get things moved as rapidly as they would like. That's actually a message on camera that could be quite helpful to this administration. Why on earth it doesn't want modern technology to assist it, as every other administration has, in projecting a message like that baffles me. But look, every White House sets its own rules. Every White House sets its own procedures. But this is not the only time there's been somebody with a powerful and informed voice of this administration talking about a particular part of either the president's agenda or his policy that's been off camera. And I, for the life of me, can't figure out why a president who is as obviously capable in dealing with this particular medium is not as comfortable with his administration officials doing likewise.
Well, Major Garrett, if anyone can figure it out, you can. Our own Major Garrett for us at the White House today, following the story from the beginning to the middle and wherever the end is. Major, thank you very much.
Sure.